will introduce a multi-agency risk assessment conference, MOROC model, in which all necessary agencies are engaged in a more coordinated plan of action to manage the conduct of perpetrators and provide protection for victims of domestic violence. The COVID-19 pandemic magnified the unfortunate fact that economic stresses lead to increased social dysfunction and domestic abuse and family violence in some extreme cases. A multi-agency risk assessment conference, a MOROC, is a meeting in which representatives from critical agencies share information on the highest risk domestic abuse cases. Representatives such as the police, child protection, housing, health, domestic violence practitioners, probation, and other specialists from the public and private sectors relevant to the case at hand. The primary focus of a multi-agency risk assessment conference, a MOROC, is to use all relevant information to discuss options to create a coordinated action plan to safeguard the adult, victim, and children where applicable. It will also connect with other agencies to manage the perpetrator's behavior. I am pleased to share that the Ministry of Social Development and Seniors, the Bermuda Police Service, and the Center Against Abuse, in partnership with Safe Lives UK, who are specialists in domestic violence, have already commenced this collaborative initiative. Bermuda will be the first country to implement a MOROC outside of the 270 plus existing conferences across England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. At the heart of a MOROC, as defined by Safe Lives UK, it is the working assumption that no single agency or individual can see the complete picture of a victim's life, but all may have insights crucial to their safety. Our efforts will focus on a national cross-ministry and agency approach to increase public awareness of the damaging effects of domestic abuse and family violence on the island's public health and improve the island's systematic response to domestic violence and abuse. Bermuda remains committed to ending domestic violence, and establishing our own MOROC is vital to safeguard our people. It would also strengthen our commitment to the UK ratification of the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. This is growth in a positive direction for Bermuda. And on behalf of the government of Bermuda, we'd like to thank all the agencies working alongside us to implement this vital resource. We understand the importance of all agencies working together for a common cause and goal, as addressing the safety of domestic violence victims requires a coordinated approach. As we continue the work to progress this initiative forward, we will keep the public informed on our progress. At this time, I would like to take the opportunity to provide progress updates of the previous Ministry of Social Development and Seniors Throne Speech initiatives made over this past legislative year. Initial amendments to the Senior Abuse Register Act have been identified. During the past year, Aging and Disability Services, which falls under the remit of the Ministry of Social Development and Seniors, commenced engagement with key stakeholders such as the banks and the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee. Their focus has been on improving the reporting, investigation, and protection of seniors from financial exploitation within the current legislative framework and using existing resources. The ministry has also hosted radio and online talk shows identifying solutions to protect seniors from financial abuse. To protect seniors against the growing prospect of financial abuse, our ministry is aware that more substantial protection is needed. This will require further development, and the work will continue as we look into key resources such as the Office of the Public Guardian. The ministry has been diligently working to finalize a consultation paper on introducing a formal register of persons with disabilities. We have done extensive research on what databases currently exist in Bermuda that collects data on persons with disabilities and on other jurisdictions that have successfully established registers for persons with disabilities. In 2023, the public consultation will commence. The purpose is to consult with the general public on the feasibility of establishing a national disability register, recognizing the views of persons who have a disability and those who are parents, guardians of persons with disabilities, and whether they would utilize the registry. It's critically important to advancing this initiative. The government remains committed to ensuring that all men, women, and children with disabilities have the easiest access to services and assistance for enhancing their lives. A national disability register will assist in identifying which essential services and the extent of the services required by those living with disabilities in Bermuda. During the past year, the Department of Child and Family Services undertook intentional actions to strengthen child safeguarding and reduce children's harm, abuse, and distress in Bermuda. Some of the work includes the Counseling and Life Skills and Assessment Unit within the Department of Child and Family Services have looked into and engaged in specialized assessment and treatment training for child victims and child offenders of sexual abuse. Litigation guardians were selected, appointed, and trained. The primary purpose of a litigation guardian is to inform the courts about a child's voice and their professional analysis of what is needed to happen going forward to guarantee that a child's safety and well-being is in place. National Child Safeguarding Committee, which the Department of Child and Family Services is a part of, is developing a national child safeguarding policy that is anticipated to be released in 2023. The committee seeks to coordinate the government response to child safeguarding by drawing on a cross-department knowledge, skills, and expertise to develop an effective multi-agency working to safeguard children from all forms of abuse through comprehensive policies. The Child and Family Services has also undertaken the establishment of Bermuda's first independent living program for children who have turned 18 years old and no longer are under the care of the system. This program will provide housing, intensive support, and guidance to our young adults so that they may become successful and productive citizens. I'm happy to share the progress that has been made with respect to preparations for occupancy. The independent living coordinator who will oversee the program has successfully completed a certification as an independent living specialist with the Daniel Memorial Institute. The Daniel Memorial Institute is an organization that promotes best practice and innovations in foster care, adoption, and independent living. Independent living support staff will be participating in therapeutic crisis intervention for families training next week to better equip them in working with young people and their families to achieve positive outcomes. A suitable multi-purpose facility has been identified, and the Department of Child and Family Services will continue to work necessary to ensure this facility is safe for occupancy. Additional town hall meetings have been scheduled with relevant stakeholders and community partners in the next coming week. The ministry is very much committed and pleased with the work being done to establish the independent living program and anticipates it will serve our young adults well within the coming months. The ministry has also focused on dementia care services, outreach to nonprofit organizations to ensure their awareness of their risk and how to mitigate them, opportunities to provide a platform for gender affairs, Human Rights Act amendment to the definition of family status, the awareness of parents, guardians, family members, and people who interact with children of the services, support, and activities that are available in the community, such as the Nurturing Our Nation Imperfect Parenting series, which focuses on educating primary caregivers and assisting them by providing practical solutions, such as coping and parenting skills. This has been done through a series of live stream panel discussions, focus groups, and a parenting expo. The topics of discussion have been boundaries, the effects of bullying and domestic violence on children, co-parenting and nurturing parents, personal care and wellness, and nutrition and meal planning. The Parenting Expo will be an annual event, and it took place this past Thursday, November 10th. We saw over 30 organizations come together on the front lawn of City Hall to provide information on community programs, child development support and services, mental health support and services, parent and education support, extracurricular activities. Bermuda, the mission of the Ministry of Social Development and Seniors is to protect all individuals during their lifetime and facilitate their well-being. During this legislative year, I look forward to continuing the work to ensure that social policies and services are in place to protect, assist, inform, and empower the most vulnerable within our community. Thank you for listening, Bermuda. At this time, I welcome my colleague, Minister Walter Roban.
Good morning, and thank you, Minister Furbert. Good morning to the media and everyone who is listening today to this press conference. Following the November 5th speech from the throne, I am absolutely excited to be here today to discuss with you the Ministry of Home Affairs initiatives for this upcoming parliamentary year. The Ministry of Home Affairs remains committed to plans and initiatives that will protect our environment, encourage growth and development with green initiatives. To that end, as stated in the speech of the throne, over this session, the ministry will focus on some very key legislative initiatives. A bill to move forward with the elimination of single-use plastics, amendment to the Clean Air Act, a Marine Development Act, and amendments to the Electricity Act of 2016. The government has undertaken many consultations on the topic of eliminating single-use plastics, and many of you will be aware of that consultation over the previous period. It included importers, retailers, grocers, people in the hospitality sector, and many groups who have been advocating for the elimination of single-use plastics. And we have taken great care to ensure that this consultation was comprehensive and wide. Representatives from the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Ministry of Public Works, together with various community stakeholders, held 5 public information sessions with over 250 persons registering for participation. Also, the consultation page for the government, the Bermuda Citizens Forum, received the 3rd highest amount of public responses regarding the ideas generated, and the 5th highest number of participants, with nearly 60 unique respondents. During the consultation period, the ministry engaged with hundreds of persons in the community, and I sincerely thank everyone who participated in that consultation process, because we want to continue this conversation so that we reach the goal of the elimination of unnecessary single-use plastics in our community. Having analyzed the feedback, the results from the public consultation leaves us with no doubt that the majority of persons in this country support this initiative and support the policy to regulate and eliminate unnecessary single-use plastics in Bermuda. And so, as announced in the throne speech, the government will introduce a bill to reduce single-use plastics. We are taking a phased approach to this initiative, and the first phase will be in the legislation for this session. As we move forward with legislating single-use plastics, we will ensure that the most positive impact on the environment and human health is a result, while simultaneously minimizing any negative economic impacts. One of the key initiatives of this process is to minimize the economic impacts that such steps will take on local businesses and other organizations. We are aware of the need to ensure that the phased approach that we are using is certainly realistic, clearly communicate what the legislative requirements will be, making allowances for some single-use plastic items that do not currently have alternatives in the marketplace, and allow exemptions, particularly for medical and other uses, which certainly cannot be eliminated at this time. Further public consultations will occur. These include meeting with and sharing the draft legislation with those most affected, such as our grocery stores, importers, restaurants, caterers, and retail outlets, and obviously those in the hospitality industry who rely on these products, and to obtain their feedback. We will also explore how government can help businesses to manage the move away from single-use plastics. Considerations including altering import tariffs to minimize economic impacts are being looked at. And at the same time, we will continue public education, which is very necessary in this, and create campaigns around that, which are designed to support behavioral change with the use of these products. This is something that we all have to participate in. We all need to change our behavior on the type of single-use products, plastic products that we use in the community. In line with protecting our environment from single-use plastics, we will also work to ensure that the air that we breathe is clean and healthy. Initially developed in 1993, the Bermuda Clean Air Act used concentration limits based on international data available at the time. And that now needs to change. On the known health effects on people, including respiratory and cardiovascular effects, such as asthma, during that period. But we all know now that these things have changed. There's a lot more information that's understood about these issues, and certainly the concern about the climate and the environment means that we now must look at changing these standards and make them more representative of the concerns and the issues that face us today. The island's outside air quality continues to be monitored to the appropriate standards as they exist. In the 30 years since the drafting of the regulations, understanding that health effects on air contaminants from combustion engine sources have been refined, air quality standards created more recently in other jurisdictions overseas are typically more stringent than those used here in Bermuda. Additionally, other than as a nuisance under the Public Health Act 1949, offensive odors under current legislation are not adequately covered. The department frequently responds to odor complaints by the public caused by licensed facilities, such as spray paint booths, the Belco electric generators, sewage treatment plants, large fuel storage areas, and the Southside Crematorium, Marsh Valley Compost Facility, and although rarely, the Tynes Bay Waste to Energy Facility. Amendments to the Clean Air Act will update and introduce new measures to address air quality standards and align with the UK and the European Union based on the latest health and safety data on exposure of air contaminants to human beings. They will also introduce measures to minimize as much as is possible and practicable the impact that nuisance odors have on the general public, especially in our residential areas. I think there's something that people need to know is that, ironically, with the studies that we've done, most of the issues around clean air, in particular, that the contaminants that are the most pervasive are not from the Belco stack or the Tynes Bay, but actually from our cars. So the quicker we move towards electrification of transport, we eliminate a considerable amount of contaminants in our air and in our environment. The Marine Development Act, now that the public will know more about an area that is particularly concerning and I'm very passionate about when it comes to protection of the environment. I've spoken on these initiatives quite often that to protect and improve our land and air is something that we must make a national priority. And I want to expand on the work that we are going to do on the Marine Development Act, beginning with what has become one of my favorite adages as I've done more work on the environment. And I quote, "We do not inherit the earth for our ancestors. We borrow it from our children." With that in mind, the public will be aware of the extensive consultation that we've been doing on the Blue Prosperity Plan that started in September 12th, and continues to be progressed now by BOP, the Bermuda Ocean Prosperity Program. Originally scheduled to end November 12th, the consultation process has been extended to December 13th, 2022, to give the public and all stakeholders an opportunity to give even more consultation and to understand more about the plan, and so that we can get more feedback to understand the issues that many may have around the plan and how the plan will shape an opportunity to show people how it will shape our economic and environmental decisions, particularly as it relates to our marine environment. Thus far, the information collected from the public consultation period has helped to refine the plan even further to ensure it achieves social and economic and environmental impacts are properly considered as it relates to the interests of the people of Bermuda. In support of this, the government will table legislation providing a framework for managing the marine spatial plan and introduce a governance structure for our Blue Economy Fund. This fund will also provide investment model for our Green Energy Fund, which will be a help to support the investment and establishment of community solar in Bermuda. We will also be making changes to the Electricity Act. Community solar will be what many of you will see is a smaller version of larger utility scale and will not require a whole lot of the licenses that currently are needed by the regulatory authority for the establishment of such utility scale operations. It will serve as an investment vehicle and provide entrepreneurial and solar installer jobs opportunities for Bermudians. That is our goal with the work that we're doing in this area. Community solar through the Green Energy Fund will not only fund the solar installations throughout our community, provide dividends to investors, but perhaps more importantly, benefit those families who cannot really afford the cost of a PV solar install in their homes, which can range up into the tens of thousands of dollars. But it will allow them to still benefit from the benefits of renewable energy. And the amendments to the Electricity Act will allow us to launch this exciting new framework, which we believe will help to transform how people benefit from energy in Bermuda, clean, reliable energy for the future. So in conclusion, I look forward to a successful implementation of the initiatives that I've outlined, and I'm confident that these opportunities will be beneficial and raise the standard of quality of life of the people of Bermuda. Thank you very much. And I am happy to entertain any questions at this time.
Thank you, Minister Roban and Minister Furbert. At the time, we will begin with questions asked of Minister Roban.
Good morning, Fiona McWhirter from the Royal Gazette, and thank you very much for your remarks this morning. Starting off, you talked a little bit about the single-use plastics pledge. We first heard about this pledge in 2018, at which point the throne speech said that single-use plastics will be eliminated by 2022. Here we are 4 years later, we're in 2022. those single-use plastics have not been eliminated, and in fact the goal has now changed to reduce rather than to eliminate. Please can you tell us a little bit about why that promise has not been kept, and why we're now going to be reducing rather than eliminating?
Thank you for the question. I think you'll know why, partially why it hasn't been met. We had a pandemic intervention between us reaching those goals. So many things had to be set aside to focus on keeping people alive through the pandemic. But we did continue the work with the process because one thing that we committed to was the consultation. So we didn't find, we are now in 2022, we are doing what is our goal, is to have a bill in place that will begin that process. Yes, it was delayed, but many things were delayed. But we're committed to continuing the process. It's been very transparent and open. That consultation has been going on for quite some time in this year, 2022. And everybody knows that it's a phased approach. There was never going to totally eliminate single-use plastics this year. It was always a phased approach, which will happen over time, which we have clearly outlined. So the process will start legislatively this year, in this session, and we look forward to continuing that process, working in a phased approach over a number of periods going forward.
Thank you very much. And some of the remarks you made this morning with regards to the single-use plastics were very similar ground to what was covered in March of this year. Can you tell us what's happened since then?
The consultation process with the stakeholders has continued. We are working not only with, as I outlined in my statement, with businesses and other interest groups like Beyond Plastic we've been talking to and working with them, and other stakeholders in the community who are interested in this initiative. We want to get this right in a way that is appropriate. So yes, our goal is to ensure this process starts this year, because we were never going to eliminate them in one single swoop. That was never the plan. Our plan has been very clear. It's a phased approach. It will start with certain items and then graduate as is realistically possible with other items to ultimately see an elimination over time.
Thank you very much. And what's the government doing to eliminate single-use plastics in the public service?
We have recyclable bins in almost every area of the government. We are working with Public Works, who's actually the waste management agency of the government, to do what we can with them. As you know, most of the plastics that are collected in the waste stream in Bermuda, plus 80, plus 90%, actually end up being burnt in the incinerator. So that, by and large, is the majority of single-use plastics, when collected, are totally eliminated from any, contaminating our environment. But there's still a problem because we still see rubbish around the island, and we will work with the government and also non-governmental organizations to continue to improve that process. But government itself is working with us to continue to do internally as well as externally what we need to fight this particular issue.
Recyclable bins don't really accommodate for single-use plastics, so is that not the point, that these things can't be recycled? So, and we recycle tin, aluminium and glass here, so that's not plastic. So what's the government doing to really combat the plastics issue?
Well, we make sure that all waste, plastic and otherwise, that's captured in the waste stream ends up at the incinerator. And that happens for the majority of plastics. As long as they're collected and they're put in a trash can in Bermuda, they are collected and they are burned. And we will continue to advance and try and modify that process with Public Works. It's not just one ministry mind. We work with others, whether it be in government and outside government, to deal with this issue.
Sure, thank you very much, appreciated. With regards to the Clean Air Act, can you confirm whether or not the government, the ministry, has consulted with the Bermuda Clean Air Coalition on the drafting of that legislation?
We will be consulting on that. We are in the process of preparing the legislation. We can't provide anything if it's not quite at that stage yet. There is a particular type of process that we go through to prepare legislation. Once we have legislation to actually provide, we will consult, and we have committed to a public consultation, not just with the Clean Air Coalition. It will be available to every member of the public to look at prior to any consideration by the legislature.
Thank you very much. And with regards to the air monitoring programme, we know that this was defunded earlier this year. Is there any update on whether or not that's going to be reinstated? How's that going to work? And how, I suppose, can you commit to enforcing clean air regulations if that air monitoring programme is not up and running?
Actually, you're incorrect. All air
Apologies.
monitoring was not eliminated. That's a falsehood that's been put out in the media. It was never. There is still air monitoring going on under the law. Belco and other facilities that are by law must provide air monitoring reports. So let's make that clear.
It's
There
not
was never a
independent,
total elimination of air monitoring. There were a couple of key places that were supported by funding that was given to BIOS that were not happening. That's all. But all of the major air monitoring that is required under the law still happens. So I think it's disappointing that the press is putting out that there's been an elimination of air monitoring. There hasn't been.
But by independent organisations, we can hardly see Belco's independent.
That is a requirement for their license to monitor their air quality, which they provide reports to us. There is a couple of other areas of which we get support from BIOS. That's what we were funding. Those particular monitoring programs will be worked to reinstate in this next budgetary year.
Good to hear. Thank you very much. And with regards to the LED light bulb programme that was mentioned as part of the government's $15 million economic relief, I understand that falls within your ministry. I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong. But if so, what's the update in that? When can we expect households to get those?
We are going through the process to get our approval for that funding to be used to purchase the light bulbs now. We're working with the Ministry of Finance to approve that funding.
Do you know how much the funding will be? How much will it cost?
As it's stated in the actual announcement, $500,000.
Thank you very much. And with regards to COP27 ongoing in Egypt at the moment, we know obviously you were a very active and involved participant in last year's COP26. And you met representatives from the Caribbean earlier this year. And I understand there were talks to be had with regards to a unified message from the region. Can you tell us a little more about what unified message was going to be delivered from our area? And with regards to Bermuda's involvement in that, what sort of voice did we have?
This year, as I have publicly announced, the decision due to the limited amount of spaces that were provided by the UK government to attend COP27, the decision was that the majority of territories that would attend, because last year we had 6, we only had 4 spaces this time. So the decision was that because of the 14 territories, only 6 could go last time. And actually, it was actually 5 because we had a space that we had to have for a technical officer. We decided that those who did not have the opportunity to go last time, the majority of those territories would go this year. So the delegation that went for the overseas territories, and I happily excluded myself to give that opportunity to another territory. And if you recall last year, I went as the leader of the delegation. So another territory is the leader of Yucatan this year. So the coordination of that team was handled by the leader of Yucatan for this year. So 3 other territories attended officially, and I have participated with them with helping them to prepare to attend. The main message I would say that the overseas territories have taken to this COP is that certainly the continuing of advancing the issues concerning ocean communities and the ocean agenda must be at the forefront of future initiatives in this area. Unfortunately, I would say, because we are an overseas territory, we don't get to sit in the plenary and participate in the negotiations. So we can only feed our message through the UK delegation. So we are doing our best to discuss those matters with the principals of the UK delegation. I'm aware that today, I believe they're meeting with Lord Goldsmith, who is the UK minister responsible for the OTs, and they're meeting with other ministers to actually advance certain key initiatives that pertain to the OTs and the environment. So that's going on. The other territories are handling that, and I have full confidence that they will make the best representations on our behalf.
Super, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Hey, good morning,
Good morning.
Minister Jasmine Patterson, ZBN Bermuda Broadcasting. Thanks for your statement today. Just keeping with your Thrones speech initiatives, with With regards to the single-use plastics, I'm sure you would have known that grocers are struggling to get their head around how they'll be able to afford biodegradable alternatives. I wondered if the government would be in a position to help fund, those sorts of tools that they may have to use to replace single-use plastic.
I actually disagree with that lifestyle position. They aren't having that much difficulty. In fact, I have to commend many of the grocers and the establishments, and that if you go in there, you'll see that a number of their items, they're already using non-plastic containers and products for what they actually provide. So I believe they're doing what they can. As I stated in my statement, and we stated continuously, we recognize that the market doesn't have everything available for us to immediately reach this goal. So we are working with the grocers. That's why the consultation process continues to make changes where they can. And I must commend many of them have made changes already. And we will work with them to make those continuous changes. I don't believe there's necessarily a need for the government to provide any support funding for this initiative, and that we want to work with them to what will be economically realistic as we make this transition. So we will work with them. We will do what we can from our standpoint to eliminate any unnecessary costs that might be associated with their transition. But again, I commend those who are already making the transition with many of their products and things. But we know that sometimes they receive stuff pre-packaged in certain types of plastics, so they can't change that. But where they can make changes, we will work with them in an economically reasonable way to make those changes.
Thank you. In terms of the Air Quality Act, you mentioned that Belco stacks and the Tynes Bay facility actually produce less emissions than that of car emissions, I
Yes.
believe. Where does this data come from?
That data can be provided, but due to the investigations we've done and research we've done to like the sediment in like tanks, in particular our water tanks, the primary elements in those sediments is actually automotive based, not from Belco, and I'm talking about island wide. Obviously different areas of the island may be different, but the constant in those investigations and that research is actually automotive sediment and the chemical carbons that come from automotive exhaust, not from those stacks, either Tynes Bay or Belco. So that's something that we know, and the quicker that we can move away from fossil fuels as our main source for our vehicle fuel, that will be eliminated from our main environment that most of us are exposed to.
Sure. And I'm sure many people will be happy to hear that you're hoping to reinstate the air quality monitoring, or at least expand it. Will the area around Belco be expanded in terms of where it's being monitored? Apparently, I believe on the south end of Belco, there is no sort of monitoring station there. I wondered if you intend to expand the monitoring program.
Well, I think the main area that, because of how the wind flows, is actually north of Belco and areas in that facility. Some of it does go in the area around by where Government House is. I think there's some there. But as I said earlier, Belco is required to provide reports on emissions by law. So we do have a record of what happens with them, of certain, that is part of their license, as is any industrial operation on the island. They must require certain monitoring, and they provide that information to us. There is work to establish another monitoring station that had to be moved because of residential issues, and that will be reinstated, but that's not one that was eliminated because of the budget. That just has to do with the actual place where it was. There was a requirement to move it. So we will reinstate. Our goal is to reinstate that funding in the next budget cycle, if the finance ministry allows, and we can provide that support funding to particularly BIOS, who was the actual agency that had been contracted to do the ones that were eliminated, which is basically down at the foot of the lane, and in like another area. So it never ever did the elimination of those stations Belco. Oh, even though that was what was implied. So the monitoring that's necessary for, okay, like for emissions right now is still happening. But we intend to reinstate that funding so we can work with BIOS in the future to continue the monitoring that they were doing on our behalf.
Do you trust Belco to give information accurately?
Well, if they don't, they're breaking the law and they risk their license. And I don't believe they want to do that because that means that you and I would all be in darkness. So the stakes are high for any lack of reporting. And I must say that the team that works in my ministry is perhaps the most qualified on the island to examine and to monitor these sort of emissions. There, in fact, is nobody outside of government who has the qualifications of Dr. Smith and the team. So the government is the best and qualified agency to determine what's happening. We have historical data. If there was some question about the data, we would know. And that is not the case at the moment. Belco is abiding by the law. Obviously, the law going forward will be tougher, and they'll have to abide by that law because none of us want to be in darkness.
Thank you. Just going to the rent and legal enforcements that are going to come in place for tenants and landlords. I wondered in what scenarios would this new law be applicable?
I am not responsible for landlord and tenant legislation. If that's what you're speaking of, that is responsibility of the AG, who has responsibility for consumer affairs. So
Thanks.
it's best you save the questions for her on that.
Are you under the Rent Commission?
No, that
it's
is all under
changed?
Consumer Affairs, which
Okay.
is under the Attorney General's chambers.
Perfect.
Attorney General, yes.
Thank you so much. So we have a new CEO at the Regulatory Authority. I wondered if you're confident in the number of change in leadership that they've had over the years, and are you confident that they're able to carry out new policy?
I am confident that the Regulatory Authority, as a well-managed regulator, whose quality of operation has been celebrated regionally and internationally, as a first-class regulator, will be able to handle the transition of the new leadership and be able to do what they do under the law. I do not get directly involved with the employment of any of their executives or their leadership. My role is only with others, with the appointment of the commission. So I don't have any doubt that the commission has felt that it has made the best decision with their new CEO.
Thank you. And just one last question. It's off topic somewhat. Going to Riddles Bay, it's been billed as a public park once construction is finished of those private properties. But however, there are signs that are banning members from the public attending the area. I wondered if you could clarify what's happening there.
I think I'll correct you. It will be open to the public. It is a privately owned land, which there are areas that have been zoned for conservation and also different levels of protection, including a nature reserve. So I do believe that the owners of the Riddles Bay development are going to make those areas, certain areas, open to the public, but it is still a private holding that has had the benefit of our recent legislation in that the owners have chosen to put a additional level of protection so that essentially for all time, that land will remain protected unless somebody at some future time goes to the legislature and wishes to change that. But that would have to be done with the consent of the owner. So they've chosen to provide a level of protection for that land, but it is still private, but will be open to the public. And as far as I know, people can go there now and go in certain areas of the Riddles Bay and for public enjoyment. They currently allow certain areas. There may be some areas where they don't because they are nature reserve and they're trying to minimize the impact. But some of the areas that are over there are certainly open to the public. So it's not a public park. It is a private park. It's a private holding that is open to the public.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Good morning, Trevor Lindsay, TNN. One question, sir.
Good morning.
We've had a mass exodus over the years of population going overseas. My question is, what are the levels of air quality due to emissions from cars? Has these individuals leaving and driving in our vehicles, had the levels dropped? Or what is the air quality from car emissions? Are they medium, low, or high?
Well, I would need to do a little bit more investigation around your question, but I can tell you that there remains considerable emissions in the environment from cars. We still have a considerable amount of cars. In reality, actually, Bermuda has been over time and over decades improving our emissions levels in different ways as, I guess, operations have become more efficient and the effort to eliminate certain types of emissions has been pushed over time. Over time, it has reduced, but it's still at a level that is unacceptable. I think with the sensitivities we have around the environment now, that getting to where emissions are as close to zero as possible is a goal. But there are still considerable emissions. The ones that are most prominent in our environment do come from automobiles, and the change in the number of people here hasn't disrupted that, because we still have cars, we still have trucks. People still buy new trucks and new cars every year, and those emissions remain.
As the monitoring devices at each Ford Bay, are they still operational?
No, those are the ones that were eliminated, that were operated by BIOS. Our intention is to bring that funding back so we can keep those. We can put those back in operation. BIOS did operate that one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Roban. We'll now take questions of Minister Furbert.
Thank you, everybody.
Trevor Lindsay again, TNA. One question for you, Minister
Hi, Jeff.
Furbert. We spoke about the domestic abusers or abuse issues since we've been in this COVID pandemic. How high have these levels? How high has this increased? And what could be the cause, might you think?
Sure, Trevor. I can only speak to statistics that's recorded through the Center Against Abuse. And these are only reported because I'm sure there are many cases out there where they go unreported. So between 2018 and 2020, there were close to an 88% increase in abuse reports, with 91 reported in 2018, 161 reported in 2019, and 171 reported in 2020. And we can all appreciate that there are many reasons why we would find an increase in domestic violence, domestic abuse, particularly throughout the pandemic. Families, intimate partners having to spend a little bit more time together, behind closed doors. Relationships, I'm sure, were tested, with unemployment opportunities being limited. Financial sort of constraints, I'm sure, were an issue with persons having to manage. And also families and children having to manage, families and children around financial concerns or issues. But there are, I'm sure, a number of reasons why we would see increases in cases of abuse.
What are the levels, data on ratio between male, female, child, young and old?
I don't have the data between males and females. However, I don't have the exact data on ratios between males and females. We do know that women do report more than males, but that's not an indication of whether or not domestic abuse is far more in females versus males. But with the increase, with the reporting of females, it would lead us to believe that females are highest experiencing domestic abuse and domestic violence.
Thank you.
and children. I don't have the exact data, but I have seen reports where there have been increases of domestic violence and abuse observed and witnessed by children.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Minister. Fiona from the
Morning.
Royal Gazette, and thank you very much for your remarks this morning. With regards to the multi-agency risk assessment conference model, can you tell us, will the Gender Affairs Council be a part of that? And if so, in what ways? And perhaps just a general update on how that council is going, since it only started earlier this year.
Thank you, Fiona. We've actually had a abundant amount of applications, actually over 40 applications of persons who are interested in serving on the Gender Affairs Council. We have recently selected the persons who will be a part of that council, which we will share with the public in the next coming months. And what we will be asking from the Gender Affairs Council and also our community is to submit submissions in regards to areas of concerns as it relates to gender. And the MOROC will definitely, and Safe Lives UK will definitely be involved with that due to our mandate with CEDAW, which includes domestic violence. And actually one of the committee members who serves on the MOROC is also part of the Gender Affairs Council.
Excellent, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And on the same topic, when agencies get together, they can discuss some of the most critical cases, I think you said earlier. How, in what ways can the government support, for example, the Centre Against Abuse in emergency situations? I'm thinking particularly of a safe house, you know, if there's a crisis situation in the middle of the night, for example.
So that does, the Centre Against Abuse, Fiona, still provides assistance, particularly with domestic, emergency domestic violence cases where someone may need assistance of being in another residence for the evening or week. They do assist in that capacity. We don't have a safe house like what we used to have, but the Centre Against Abuse does provide a service where they try to seek suitable accommodations to make sure that someone is safe. The government does provide a $100,000 grant to Centre Against Abuse as well to assist with domestic abuse and violence.
Thank you very much. The Independent Living Transition Programme, you said earlier this year, you told Parliament that it was due to be open within the next few months. Obviously some months on, you said today it's expected to be up and running within the coming months. It sounds like there has been some training happening in the interim, yes. I think you said today. Can you maybe tell us a little more just about the process and a realistic timeline for getting this up and running? So
nobody wants this up and running more than I do this, and even our country and our community, because this has been something that has been talked about for years, Fiona, and you know, we need to be able to provide program and secure housing for persons who age out of the care of DCFS who do not have what we call a reunification connection with their prior family. And so what we find is that once they age out, they're usually having to find accommodations because once someone ages out, they don't necessarily still have to take on the services that are provided by DCFS. They can choose to say, I'm done and I'm going to move on. However, we still find that a supportive structure is needed, particularly for those persons between the ages of 18 and 24. Anyone who can identify with being an 18-year-old, we would know that you're not quite 100% ready to be out there flying on your own. You still need, and even as an adult, we still need support. And so we are currently meeting with the area residents to just, you know, inform them of what are wanting trained for it does, particularly, I'm sure if you studied across the Caribbean countries, that this is definitely something that is a first for us as Bermuda, and also a program like this across the Caribbean as well.
Sure. And you talked there about conversations with members of the community. Have they been receptive, supportive of the idea?
So we've had one meeting. We're hoping to have another meeting this week so that we can get a better idea. There were lots of questions that were asked, of course. Being sensitive to making sure that the area is still safe. In any community, we want everyone to feel safe, and so we're continuing to have talks with the area residents, hoping that they embrace this and understand the need for this program.
Super, thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Dana.
And you mentioned also with regards to litigation guardians, and I think you said earlier this year that they would be gazetted, and I couldn't see that there was any reference to that gazette notice.
Correct.
So can you just maybe tell us, why that didn't happen then, or even how many litigation guardians are currently operating?
Sure. We were in the process of redoing some of the contracts for litigation guardians, so that has been quite a hold up in actually gazetting. But we will gazette the names of the litigation guardians. I believe we have 5.
Sure. That's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Fiona.
Hi, good morning, Minister.
Hi, Jasmine.
Thanks for your comments today. If I may just go back to the risk assessment with UK Safe Lives, just to get the scope or the scale of the project, what sort of funds will be set aside for this project?
So thanks for that question. Safe Lives was here with us last month, and they're actually, if we remember, there was a survey that went out to our community back in August where we were able to compile information and data. They're looking to have that information and data reported to us at the end of November. We will take that information, Jasmine, and we will come up with a working plan to decide what sorts of funding which would support this particular structure. So we don't have that information quite yet. We're actually waiting for the report to come back, and then we'll work around a working plan to discover what further funds will be required to support the Morocco program.
Now, there's a lot of collaboration involved, as you described. I wondered if there is, an infrastructure or a basis for those organizations to share information. Do we have a centralized database for victims and families of domestic violence?
So we don't have a centralized database, but there is information that is shared by the Bermuda Police. Sorry, there is information that is collected by the Bermuda Police Service, and there's also information that is shared, not shared, collected through the Center Against Abuse. However, I do believe that the Bermuda Police Service and Center Against Abuse do share their results publicly. Yes.
If I may, just going back to the independent living facility, how many young adults would qualify for to live there at present?
Sure, 6 females and 6 males.
Okay. Do you have their age ranges?
So between the ages of 18 and 24. And so it would be persons who are aging out currently, but also persons who still fall within that age range who may be displaced, but still could apply and be a part of that program.
Is there any criteria that would not allow them to be eligible to live there?
So with any sort of group home living, they will have to sign a contract. This is also voluntary, and so they will have to agree to rules as it relates to group living. So there is a criteria. Once we go through those rules and guidelines and regulations, then we take it from there. But there is definitely an intake assessment as well as rules and guidelines that they will have to abide by.
Okay, thank you. Just looking at the elderly population, we know in about 4 years we're going to be at a point where the economy cannot sustain its population, and it's quite urgent. Does the island currently have the infrastructure to support an aging population in terms of long-term health care?
I think we would know by the recent reports that has been in the media in regards to our aging population, that there is much work that needs to be done around this. We are still engaging within the National Senior Strategy, and we've also recently sent out an expression of interest for the Aging Well Committee, which we've also had a ton of applications in regards to that. So there are definitely persons in our community who are committed to that cause. But the Aging Well Committee has come up with goals and objectives that will help to navigate the direction that we would like to see for our seniors. And of course, while they're working on those goals and objectives, it will also help us understand the costing around that. We are also working with the Ministry of Health, and particularly looking at funding that may be needed, particularly for long-term care in Bermuda. So there's still a lot of work that we need to do to even examine what that cost would look like for us as a country in supporting our seniors.
Sure. With such a short time frame, do you
Mhm.
feel that these goals are realistic?
So we will look at our goals and we will try to make them as realistic as we can. There will be phases of support for these goals, and actually looking and observing the goals. There are a lot of agencies who are doing a lot of work already. A lot of work, yes.
And just one last question. I'm not sure if this comes under your remit, but the vulnerable homeless population. I wondered if there was any developments in that area. We know another charity was developed to help them, but how would you describe their plight at the moment?
Well, we do know that our homeless figures have gone up. This area does fall under our ministry. We have been working very closely with the charity whom the Minister of Public Works has also recently announced what government is committed to do by way of housing, affordable housing, particularly in our community, to increase that inventory so that there is more access. There's also another group that has come on board here recently, which is the Transitional Living Center, which is a housing community for women and their children. And so as government increases its support for housing, our community is also stepping up to be able to assist our homeless population. And you also want to be very careful when we use the term homeless, because some people who we think are homeless are not necessarily homeless. And there is actually a housing solution in place, but the country is moving with a housing first strategy to try to ensure that we have more home inventory, particularly for for our community.
Sure, definitely. Yeah. And for those who do sleep rough in Hamilton, you see them on a night out or, just going out for dinner, is there, plans specifically to address those who are, literally sleeping on the streets?
So Salvation Army still exists as an emergency shelter. The Ministry of Public Works has recently, we're going to be adding 20 new beds to the Salvation Army site. And my ministry, the Ministry of Social Development, provides an operational grant for the Salvation Army site. And sometimes it is a question of will. They do go and they ask, along with whom, can we assist you so that you're not having to sleep rough. And some people are still choosing to sleep rough. It is a lifestyle for many who have done this for many, many years. But we will not stop asking because one day it just might be the answer where they will come off of the street and not want to sleep rough.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
There are no further questions. Minister Furbert and Minister Roban, I'd like to thank you for being here, and as well to the media and the listening audience. That is the end of the press conference, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.